I never told the Custer County Sheriff's Office the whole truth about what we found behind that grain bin. The parts one left out don't show up in any police report. I've stopped expecting anyone to believe them anyway. But I need to write them down somewhere, so here they are. My name's Sarah Whitmore. I run a small estate liquidation business out of Kearney, Nebraska. For 12 years, my job has been walking into dead people's houses and figuring out what's worth selling, what's worth keeping, and what belongs in a dumpster. I've cataloged gun collections, worked through hoarders' houses stacked to the ceiling with yellowed newspaper, once spent 3 days pricing out a dead man's collection of 400 snow globes. Nothing about the job usually keeps me up at night. That changed the week I drove out to a farmhouse off Route 21, 20 minutes north of Broken Bow, in October of last year. The property belonged to a man named Elmer Kessler, 86, no wife, no children. His only living relative was a nephew named Tom Ashford, soft-spoken, 30-something, worked in insurance out in Lincoln, hadn't set foot on the place since he was a kid. Tom hired my assistant Diane Mercer and me to inventory the house before he sold the land to a neighbor who wanted the acreage for soybeans. He planned to meet us there the first day, mostly, I think, out of guilt for never visiting his uncle while the man was alive. He'd mentioned that twice on the phone, unprompted, the way people talk themselves into something they're not sure of. The house sat half a mile back from the county road, down a gravel driveway lined with dead cottonwoods. 2-story white farmhouse, wraparound porch gone soft with rot, a leaning red barn, and a row of grain bins standing like rusted silos against a flat gray sky. Unremarkable, except that something about it, even from the driveway, put the hair up on my arms before I'd parked the truck. I blamed the weather. A storm front was rolling in from the northwest, the kind of low sky that makes everywhere look abandoned. Diane, camera bag already unzipped in her lap, said the place looked like a postcard nobody wanted to send. I laughed. I remember not quite meaning it. Tom met us at the porch a little before 9, apologizing for being late, saying he'd gotten turned around on roads he grew up on. He kept working the house keys between his fingers even after he'd found the right one, turning it over and over like a worry stone he couldn't put down. Nobody's touched anything since he passed, Tom said, unlocking the door. 2 years now. County did a wellness check when the mail piled up. That's how they found him. Heart attack, sitting right there in his recliner. The inside smelled the way you'd expect dust, mildew, old wood, but underneath it sat something sour, something like a root cellar, damp earth gone slightly off, the kind of smell that makes you breathe through your mouth without deciding to. The furniture was old but worthless, a recliner with a body-shaped dent worn into the cushion, a console television nobody made parts for anymore, floral wallpaper peeling in the hallway like old skin. A calendar hung in the kitchen, still turned to the month Elmer died, 2 Octobers passed, every square blank except one the day of his death, circled in pencil so hard it had torn through the paper, though nobody had been alive to circle it. I didn't clock that detail at the time. I clock it now, writing this. Diane started photographing rooms. I walked downstairs taking notes. Tom trailed behind us, saying less with every room, like the house was pulling something out of him he hadn't expected to surface. He used to keep dogs, Tom said at one point, standing in the kitchen doorway. 2 of them, when I was a kid. Never let them in the house. Kept them chained by the barn. He frowned. Come to think of it, I don't know what happened to them. Nobody mentioned dogs when he died. We kept working. By early afternoon we'd made it through most of the ground floor, nothing stranger than an unsettling number of canning jars in the pantry, 200, easily, all empty, all lined up with a precision that felt almost military for a man Tom described as increasingly reclusive in his final years. He used to be social, Tom said, running a finger through the dust on a shelf. My mom used to talk about the church picnics he'd host out here. Somewhere along the way he just stopped answering the phone. It was Diane who found the boot prints. She'd gone out to photograph the barn around 2 while Tom and I finished the pantry, and she came back through the kitchen door pale enough that I set my clipboard down before she said a word. There's fresh mud tracked across the barn floor, she said, low, like she didn't want the house to hear her. Boot prints. Men's 10 or 11. They're everywhere back there, Sarah, not once. Regularly. Like a path worn in. Tom looked confused rather than alarmed. Maybe the neighbor's been out here scouting the land. Hal Dorkson. Reasonable. We treated it as one. Diane called out toward the barn, got nothing back but the wind, and we returned to work, though she kept glancing at the open barn doorway for the rest of the afternoon, and twice found small reasons not to be alone. The strange part came around 4, sky gone the color of a bruise, the storm finally rolling in. We'd moved upstairs to the bedrooms. I was in what had clearly been a guest room, cataloging a dresser full of a dead woman's clothes, when I heard footsteps cross the floor directly beneath me. Slow. Deliberate. Heel, then the drag of a sole, like someone favoring one leg. Tom. I called down. That you? I'm right here, his voice answered from the room across the hall. Too close for him to have been the one downstairs. Diane's head appeared in her doorway. The three of us stood there listening. The footsteps had stopped the instant I spoke. Cut off mid-stride. No fading. No natural end to them at all. We went down together and found the ground floor exactly as we'd left it. Nothing disturbed. No open doors, no draft. Tom laughed it off too quickly, said old houses do that, wood contracting before a storm. I wanted to believe him. I've heard houses talk plenty of times in this line of work. But those had been footsteps, evenly spaced and weighted, and some part of me kept insisting the difference mattered. By 5 the storm had rolled in fully, rain hammering the tin roof hard enough to shout over. We packed up. Tom locked the door behind us, tugging the handle twice to be sure. As we pulled out, headlights sweeping the dead cottonwoods, I glanced in the mirror and could have sworn just for a second that a light was on in an upstairs window that had been dark all day. I didn't mention it to Diane. I told myself it was a reflection off my own headlights, and I kept telling myself that all the way to a diner in Broken Bow, where we ate dinner and didn't talk about the house at all. We went back 2 days later, once the roads had dried. This time the boot prints in the barn had multiplied, fresh ones layered over old, tracking up the back porch steps to the kitchen door. A door that had been locked both times we left it. Tom's face went the color of old paper. Hal wouldn't come up to the house, he said quietly. There's no reason to. And even if he did, he sure as hell wouldn't try the door. We called the sheriff's non-emergency line, and a deputy named Halvorsen drove out to walk the property with us. Same prints. Recent. But no forced entry anywhere, no broken windows, no tampered locks. Hunters cutting across the land, he said gently, more common out here than people think. He took a report and left, and I watched his taillights vanish down the driveway and felt, for the first time all week, genuinely alone out there, the kind of alone where you become aware of every window in a house and which direction each one is facing. That evening, working in the fading light before the second storm rolled in, I found the recordings. They were in a closet in the room Tom said belonged to Elmer's older brother, Frank, a man Tom barely remembered, assumed had died decades earlier, though he admitted he'd never actually asked. It was one of those family things nobody talked about, Tom said from the doorway, arms crossed like the room itself ran cold. Under a stack of moth-eaten quilts sat a dozen reel-to-reel tapes, each labeled in careful handwriting going back to the 1980s, and a battered player to go with them. Curious, and with the storm keeping us there anyway, I threaded one on and pressed play, half expecting static. It was Elmer's voice. Older, tired, talking to someone in the room who never once spoke back, though Elmer paused, every so often, as if listening. Sometimes for 10 or 15 seconds at a stretch. Long enough that Diane and I kept exchanging looks. You can't keep doing this, Frank, the tape said, his voice cracking with something between exhaustion and love. Doc says you need to stay upstairs where it's safe. I can't keep explaining the noise to the neighbors. A long silence. Then, softer, I know it's hard. I know. But I made a promise, and I'm going to keep it as long as I've got breath left to keep it with. Tom had gone completely still behind us. Frank died, he said, more to himself than us. Everybody always said Frank died in the 70s. There's no grave, but nobody ever said different. My mom said he passed young. I never once thought to ask how. Diane found the second staircase while Tom sat on the edge of the dead man's bed, hands pressed flat against his knees like he was holding himself down. It was narrow, hidden behind a false panel in the pantry wall, a seam in the wallpaper we'd walked past a dozen times, disguised behind a section of shelving that swung outward on a hinge built to look like a plain cabinet door. It led to a low, cramped space above the kitchen, invisible from any angle inside the house. A cot. A chamber pot. Stacks of canned food identical to the jars downstairs. A single bare bulb on a pull chain. And more tapes, newer ones, the handwriting shakier, dated as recently as 18 months ago. A stack of paperback westerns sat beside the cot, spines cracked from reading and rereading. A child's drawing was pinned to the low ceiling, so faded I couldn't tell what it had once shown. Elmer had died 2 years earlier. Someone had been recording tapes in that room 18 months ago. I don't fully remember deciding to leave. Only that all three of us were moving toward the front door at once, Tom shouting Frank's name into the stairwell behind us, and getting nothing back but rain and, underneath it, so faint I've spent a year telling myself I imagined it, something that might have been a low, tired voice saying, "I'm not finished yet." We didn't go back inside that night. We sat in my truck at the end of the driveway, doors locked, engine running, watching the house through sheets of rain, headlights off, none of us saying much. We called the sheriff again. This time they took it seriously, 2 units, despite the weather. It took almost an hour of searching, dogs included, flashlights sweeping between the barn and the grain bins, before they found him. Frank Kessler was 79 years old. He had, according to what the county eventually pieced together, spent nearly 50 years living in that house without officially existing anywhere on paper after 1974, the same year town records showed a young woman named Carol Reyes, Frank's one-time fiancée, had been reported missing from a neighboring county and never found. Nobody could prove what happened between Frank and Carol that year. Only that Elmer had spent the rest of his life keeping his brother fed, hidden, and silent, telling neighbors Frank had moved away, telling family he'd died, building an entire private history around a man the world was never supposed to remember. A single missing persons flyer for Carol Reyes still sat in the county file, her photograph faded almost to nothing, no leads noted after the first few months. Frank himself, when deputies found him crouched behind the grain bin nearest the barn, soaked through and shaking in a canvas coat 2 sizes too big, said almost nothing coherent except to ask, again and again, whether Elmer was going to be angry with him for coming outside. One deputy told me later, off the record, that Frank kept apologizing for tracking mud into the house. Over and over. As if 50 years of hiding had shrunk his entire world down to the size of a clean floor. They took him in for evaluation, not arrest, no charges were ever filed, no body was ever found, and no one alive could say for certain what happened to Carol Reyes decades earlier. Frank was moved to a state facility in Lincoln, where, as far as I know, he remains. He rarely speaks. In a year of questioning, he has never once said what happened the night Carol disappeared. A caseworker described him to Tom as gentle, disoriented by simple things, electric light, running water, and unable to answer any question about the outside world with more than a handful of words. Tom sold the property within the month, at a loss. The farmhouse was torn down last spring, the grain bins hauled off for scrap. Nothing left standing but a bare patch of foundation and a stretch of gravel driveway leading up to nothing at all. Tom called me once, months later, mostly just to talk, he said, though I think he needed to hear from someone else who'd been there, someone who could confirm he hadn't imagined the whole thing. He told me he still dreams about that false panel swinging open. How easy it was. How it moved like it had been waiting for someone to finally try it. I finished the job. I got paid. I've turned down every estate job involving an empty farmhouse since, no matter the fee, and I've told this story maybe 3 times in a year, always leaving out the last part, because I don't know what to do with it, and I'm not sure anyone else would either. When the sheriff's team finally cleared the hidden room above the kitchen, they found one more tape in the player. Unlabeled, unlike the others. The reel already wound to its very end, as though it had just finished playing the moment before we arrived. Nobody could explain how it got there. The machine required manual threading, nobody admitted touching it, and the room had been sealed and cordoned since the night we found it, checked twice by deputies who swore nothing inside had moved. Officer Halvorsen let me listen to it once, months later, before it went into evidence. He played it on a small handheld recorder in the parking lot outside the sheriff's office, both of us standing by his cruiser with the engine ticking as it cooled. It was 11 seconds long. Frank's voice, calm and unhurried, saying only, "I know you're standing in the kitchen. Elmer used to stand there too. I haven't been back to Broken Bow since, and I don't plan to. But every so often, usually on nights when the wind picks up the way it did that October, I find myself back in that kitchen doorway in my mind, standing exactly where I stood the first afternoon with my clipboard in hand. And I wonder whether that tape was already sitting in the player when we walked in that first morning. Wound down. Waiting. However impossibly, for the exact moment we'd finally be close enough to hear it. I wonder, too, whose voice will be on the next one."